Okay, so this is the Bible study for Exodus chapter 4, verses 1 through 17. And the text says, Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you?'" Then the Lord said to him, "What is in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. "This," said the Lord, "is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." Then the Lord said, "Put your hand inside your cloak." So Moses put his hand into his cloak, and when he took it out, his skin was leprous. It had become white as snow. "Now put it back in your cloak," he said. So Moses put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, "If they do not believe you or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground." Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." But Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. But take the staff in your hand so you can perform the signs with it." All right. So number one in our Bible study, remember you can download a PDF copy of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along in the questions with us. And and as we study this scripture. Number one says, what happened in last week's Bible study? A, Moses was sent to assemble the elders of Israel. B, Moses is told that the elders will listen to him and he is to go with them to the king of Egypt and ask him to allow them to go into the wilderness to sacrifice to their God. See, God tells Moses that he knows the king of Egypt will not listen unless a mighty hand compels him. God says, I will stretch out my hand. And E, God promises that they will not only leave, but they will plunder Egypt as they go. So all of that happened last week as God was calling Moses. And so we kind of have a continuation of the call of Moses here. So, this is the third week, I think, Moses, fourth week, maybe, if we talk about the stories that Moses told about his youth or his past, and how God had inclined his heart toward compassion and justice. But then we had a week with the burning bush, but God is still speaking to Moses. And so then all of this stuff happened. And then God is still speaking to Moses, and Moses is asking questions now about, what if they don't listen? So number two, what does Moses ask God in 4:1? What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say the Lord did not appear to you? So this is just some Yehu that showed up saying that God spoke to him, and we're supposed to, go to Pharaoh who's oppressing us because this guy just came and said God spoke to us, spoke to him. No, we're not going to go do that. So Moses is sort of foreseeing that this is not probably going to happen. Now, never mind that God has already said that Pharaoh won't listen unless he stretches out his mighty hand. So we have to believe that God has a plan in this, that God has already thought about this, that God has a way to make sure that people are going to listen to Moses. And that's how he answered Moses. He showed him the way. This is how you're going to that people are going to listen. Number 3, how does God respond according to verses 2-9? A, God turned Moses' staff into a snake and then back into a staff. So I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I would grab the tail of that snake. But God gave him instructions, and as he followed the instructions, by the way, that's important throughout Scripture, as he obeyed and followed the instructions that God gave him, miracles happened. So he had to throw the staff on the ground. He had to grab the snake by the tail, or else those miracles don't happen. But when he obeys God, God works the miracle. We can go all the way into the New Testament when Jesus is performing miracles, or there's an action that's required from the person, and then God works the miracle. But that's a whole different sermon or message or Bible study, perhaps. But B, God caused Moses' hand to become leprous and then healed it. So he stuck it in his cloak. When he pulled it out, it was leprous. When he stuck it back in his cloak, he pulled it out, it was like the rest of his skin. It was healthy. See, God gave these signs and wonders as a way to show that he had indeed sent Moses. So this is what God did when Moses said, "What if they don't listen?" God said, "Here, I'm gonna show you. These are the miracles that I'm going to perform. So this is what you need to do, and I'll perform these miracles." See, God gave these signs. Oh, I already read that one. God gave these signs as a way to show that he had indeed sent Moses. D, God said that if they do not believe or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. And then E, God told him that if they didn't believe the first 2 signs, he is to take water from the river and pour it on dry ground, and it will become blood. So God gave him 3 signs that surely after these 3 signs, the leaders of Israel, the elders of Israel, will believe that Moses really was sent by God, that Moses really heard from God, and God's going to perform these miracles to accredit Moses. So that's a term we use for schools when they've got sort of the seal of approval that what they're teaching and what is valid and should constitute a diploma or a degree when you graduate. The school is accredited. That's also the term that I believe John used in the Gospels to say that Jesus was accredited to them by God. Perhaps Peter used it in the book of Acts. But I know John is the one who talked about these signs have been given to you. Jesus performed more signs, but these ones are given to you that you might believe. And I think it was Peter that said Jesus was a man accredited to you by God. So in other words, the miracles that Jesus performed were a form of accreditation, where because he performed these, we know that he is who he said he is, because he did this stuff. Then we know that God was really with him, and that we really should be believing him. And God did the same thing for Moses here. Number 4, how did Moses respond in verse 10? A, he was grateful for these amazing signs that God is enabling him to perform and confident that they will believe the signs and wonders God will give. This is not true. That's how most of us would be like, all right, okay, we've got the signs, here I go. Fine. But Moses said, B, Moses says, pardon me. He has never been eloquent and he is slow of speech and tongue. So he's got another reason why he can't go, despite the fact that God now has told him, I'm going to be with you and my mighty hand's going to be with you. And oh yeah, by the way, here's some miracles that I'm allowing you to perform, or I'm going to do on your behalf when you do these things. So people are going to listen to you. And Moses says, yeah, but I can't really talk. C, Moses is telling God all the reasons why he is not the right person for the job, despite the wonders God has already displayed that he can do. Is he more concerned about his weakness than God's strength? Okay, so in logical terms, if it's not you, when you're looking from the outside and you're reading this story, you say, I don't understand why Moses didn't believe that God could do. I mean, he says, I'm not eloquent of speech. Maybe he's being manipulative. Maybe he says, oh yeah, by the way, if you can do these miracles, can you fix this too? But the reality is, well, one, this may be another sermon for another day, but one, God did not fix his tongue. God did not fix his speech and make him eloquent. God, I believe God could perform miracles, but there are certain things he didn't fix, because if he fixed, Moses might think that it was him that was doing this. But at some point, we need to see how our weaknesses don't hold us back, because God's strength, as he tells Paul, God's strength is made perfect in your weakness. And if he makes us eloquent, people listen to us, then at some point we have the same problem that King Saul had, and that is that we think we're the ones that are eloquent, and that's why people listen to us. When people listen to us despite us not being eloquent, then we know that God has worked a miracle. So I don't know if Moses was hoping God would heal that, or if Moses was just like legit not wanting to go. So one of the things that my mom used to tell me is, she said, when you're on your third excuse, you just don't want to go. So a lot of us see Moses is on his third excuse, what if they don't listen to me? I'm not eloquent, can you send somebody else? And so the second excuse is I've never been eloquent. The third one says, yeah, okay, you've had a good answer, but I just don't want to go. Can you send somebody else? And you realize that he's ran out of excuses, because God's got an answer for all of them, but he just doesn't want to go. So God, not happily, it seems angrily, says, fine, here I am sending you. What about your brother Aaron? He can talk. Okay, he's already on his way to meet you, and he's going to be happy about it. Okay, you're not happy, but he's going to come. He's going to be happy about it, because I don't know, maybe Aaron liked the attention a little better than Moses. Maybe that's why God didn't send Aaron to begin with. But he says he's already on the way to meet you, and he's going to be happy to see you, and he's going to go with you, and you're going to tell him what to say. And I don't think that God is happy about this, because God has answered every doubt that Moses has. But in the end, it's not about answering the doubts, because Moses just doesn't want to go. He says, can you just send somebody else? And we like to say that we would all be, the signs would be good enough for us and that we wouldn't do this. But I think if we're all honest with ourselves, we can think back on things that we know that God has told us to do. And, we first had some legitimate reservations. Man, I don't know. What if I'm not able? What if they don't listen to me? I can't control whether they listen. And he says, here, I'm going to make them listen. And then you say, yeah, but I don't know. I don't have these gifts. I shouldn't, that's not really my thing. And God says, it's going to be fine. I'm going to be with you. And then the third time we're like, you know, just send somebody else. I don't want to go. And if God answers that prayer, one, we miss out on a blessing. If God does send somebody else, what really happens is we're the ones that miss out. I'll never forget. It's one of my early messages that I preached when I was the lead pastor of Sandia. Is the is that this idea that a lot of pastors give guilt trips and say, you need to be involved in this, or else, kind of, if we don't go, who will? Nobody, people will be lost. And I don't think I think all that's true. But I remember that God had spoken to me and said, yeah, but this isn't about the guilt trip of how you'll feel if people go to hell because of you. What about the blessing that you lose out on? What about the fact that you're not involved in God's plan? What about the fact that you're going to end up in hell, first of all, because you declined to do what God has called you to do, because you just said no to God and walked away from obedient relationship with him. We just studied in our Wednesday studies, we're studying in the book of 1 Samuel, and Saul lost the kingdom because he did not do what God said. And he lost out on what God was trying to do through him, and through his family line. And we're going to miss out. So God did not let Moses fully escape. He still pulled him in. But he really was. So the point is, when you're saying no to God and you're hoping that he'll give you permission not to be a part of something, the reality is you're begging for him to allow you not to be a part of his will. And eventually he'll let you not be a part of his will because you have free will. But that is not a prayer you want him to answer. That is something that you hope he convinces you otherwise. I mean, if you're thinking about the consequences of it all, is what I mean. You want to be a part of God's will. You're going to miss out for not being a part of God's will. And unfortunately, a lot of us have this same argument with God regularly. And number 5 says, how does God respond in verses 11 and 12? It says, the Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouth? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and teach you what to say. So God says, look, I'm going to be there. I'm the one that made you able to talk. I know what your weaknesses are. I know that you're not eloquent. I'm not going to use you because you're eloquent. I'm going to use you because you're obedient, and you're going to be my mouthpiece. And therefore I will say, now, who knows if he had chosen to go, if God would have cleared up his speech immediately when he began to speak. See, all the other miracles required Moses's obedience in order for them to be, in order for them to happen. Is it possible that Moses missed out on the healing of his speech that could have happened because he didn't obey in this point the way he did when he was told to throw the staff on the ground? And so I think some of us will obey up to a point until we get to the place where it's too big and we won't obey. So we'll throw the staff on the ground. We'll grab the snake by the tail. We'll put our hand in our cloak. we'll pour water on the ground, but when it comes time to go and do the will of God, go and speak to people about what God has said, then that's the place we draw the line, and therefore we don't receive the miracle that God had planned for that. Perhaps that's the case. Or perhaps God didn't want to heal him because God wanted to speak through him, and Moses not think it was him. Moses know that it was God. I don't know. But I do think either way, Moses missed out. And I believe even though Moses ended up going with Aaron, I still believe Moses had missed out on a good portion of God's blessing. Now, let's just say that later on, Moses is angry. Aaron's the one that helped him make the golden calf. So we see a problem here. And Moses comes down as angry and throws the tablets and the whole thing. And what about these people that you've given me, God? And so Moses complains about the rebellion and the lack of obedience that the people have. And can we just say that the people are a lot like their leader? That the one that is leading them is somebody who didn't want to do what God called them to do to begin with. And isn't it funny how hard it was for Moses to have compassion on them in that situation? Anyway, number 6. What does Moses say to this according to verse 13? But Moses said, "Pardon your servant. Lord, please send someone else." Now, there's nobody that's ever been called to ministry in the kingdom of God that has not, I believe, at least been tempted to say that prayer. It's a big calling. It's hard. People don't want to go. The question is, when it comes down to it, do we go? The second part of this question says, at what time do Moses's arguments become disobedient? Honestly, I think it's right here. I think God was willing to help him. God was willing to meet him where he was. God was willing to answer his questions. But at the point where Moses still wasn't going to go, and he had no more questions to ask, no more good excuses. And now he just says, yeah, but I don't want to do this. And I think this became disobedience. Now, ultimately, Moses went with Aaron for God. So you could say ultimately he obeyed, but I'm not sure, because the way God had to do it, he brought somebody in there that wasn't his original plan. And Aaron was a help sometimes, but at other times brought trouble. And I just don't believe that was God's original plan. And I believe Moses became disobedient there. There were other points where, I mean, Moses ultimately didn't go into the promised land because of his own lack of faith at times. And so how did God feel about Moses's answer? I don't think God was happy. It says, verse 14, then the Lord's anger burned against Moses. That's why I believe this is the point when he became disobedient. Before that, God was willing to answer the questions. But at this point, he sent Aaron, but his anger burned because Moses was being disobedient. God was not happy about this. And the last part, did God send someone else? Yes, no, explain. He sent somebody with Moses, but I mean, he sent the mouthpiece, he sent the speaker, but Moses was the leader. And God told him, Moses, that it'll be like you will be God speaking to Aaron. In other words, Aaron's not hearing from God. Aaron's hearing from Moses. Moses is the one that hears from God. Moses is the one that should be the leader. but Aaron's the one that's speaking to the people, and Moses is feeding Aaron the lines. And I don't think that's a good recipe, because Aaron's the one with influence, and when Moses disappears, Aaron goes astray. When Moses is up talking to God, Aaron's the one that doesn't stand firm. And so Aaron shouldn't be the leader. The one that hears from God should be the leader, no matter how eloquent he is or not. Um, and so that's God wasn't happy with that. God did send somebody else, but he sent him with Moses, and I don't believe it was the ideal situation. Number 7, how do you respond when God calls you? And then, are his demonstrations of power enough for you to trust and obey? And the good Bible study answer is, I obey. Yes, they're enough. But the truth of most of our lives is that's not really true. We've often had a lot of questions and conversations, and hopefully we've come to the place where we obey. But many of us, I believe, have come to the point where we disobeyed and God's anger burned against us, because we were just so stubborn and didn't want to do what he told us to do. And if we did, we went grudgingly, and we went with Aaron causing problems the whole way. So we need to listen to God and obey, and his assurances ought to be enough for us. He's shown us more than he ever needed to give us reason to obey and follow him.